There's nothing quite like the taste of a homegrown tomato right out of the garden. Fresh fruits, vegetables, flowers for the dinner table. These are just a few of the pleasures of a happy garden. Today we're going to be talking about one of the fundamentals for a happy garden, compost. Hi, I'm Amy Landers with GardensThatMatter.com. Welcome and thank you for joining me for Quick Start to Composting. The focus of this training is to show you the key things you need to know to make compost and healthy soil that's going to help your garden thrive. When you have a compost pile, you see waste differently. Things like kitchen scraps, fall leaves, even shredded junk mail. These throwaways become ingredients in something really, really good. They mix and they meld, they break down, and they become new again as rich, dark compost. Compost that makes our soil healthy and our gardens happy. If you're just starting out and feel a little overwhelmed, don't worry, we're going to take this step by step. Maybe you're worried that your compost is going to be stinky or icky. I've got you covered. We're going to make sure that your compost pile doesn't gross you out. If you've done some composting before and it turned out kind of we're going to give you the know-how to try again and get the results that you're after. Composting really is the cornerstone for a healthy garden and a sustainable home. It's the perfect place for an aspiring gardener to begin. So if you love the idea of growing your own food or a yard full of beautiful flowers, and you want to make a real difference in the world, this is a great place to start. Composting has so many amazing benefits, and I'm going to tell you about those in just a few minutes. I'm going to show you how to build a simple bin. That's how you're going to get started. It's easy, it's inexpensive, anyone can do this. You can even involve your kids. Now, you might be wondering why I am so excited about compost. Let me show you how I got started. I grew up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina. My own introduction to compost came from my grandmother and a bucket in her kitchen, the slop bucket. Named from when her family kept pigs, the bucket was filled with kitchen scraps as Grandma made amazing food, like fried apple pies. By the time I came around, there were no pigs to feed, so she dumped the slop bucket daily at the edge of the woods. Now, this is not an ideal way to compost. The neighborhood dogs, possums, and raccoons ate well from her pile. But it still worked. We dug for fishing worms there, and the dark soil was full of life. Later, for an 8th grade science fair project, I built an official compost pile in a wire bin. I called it the Backyard Breakdown. I laced it with little screen packets holding test materials, a piece of bread, paper scraps, a plastic label, and I studied which materials decomposed and how quickly. Fast forward to today, and I carry apple cores home with me to add to the compost bin. I get to compost and garden alongside my husband, Colby. We've been tending gardens together for more than 10 years. We grow fruits and vegetables, herbs and flowers. We've raised chickens, honeybees, and many other animals. We create habitat for pollinators and beneficial insects. And of course, we've grown our fair share of weeds. Now we are also raising 3 young boys. We are passionate about making the world a better place for them, starting right at home. On our family's small farm, we're growing food for ourselves and our community in western North Carolina. We practice a mix of permaculture, biointensive growing, and traditional farming. We're transitioning to organic. We've had some delicious successes, and we've had some potentially embarrassing failures. We're learning lots as we grow. We started GardensThatMatter.com to share our journey and help others get started growing their own beautiful, bountiful gardens. Now, what makes a garden matter to me may not be the same things that matter to you. On our blog and in our videos, we look at the many aspects of gardening: growing your own fresh, healthy food, feeding wildlife like butterflies, bees, and hummingbirds, creating spaces where you feel more grounded and connected to nature, getting the kids involved, helping them unplug and play outside, becoming more self-sufficient, and finding real ways to live more sustainably, and making your life a little more lovely. At GardensThatMatter.com, we want to help you grow what matters most to you. Whether your garden is big or small or just an idea in your head, gardensthatmatter.com is a place where you can find support, information, and inspiration. Now, let me ask you a question. What kind of garden matters to you? Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. Soak up the colors, smell the earth, feel the warmth of the sun on your shoulders. You can even imagine biting into your favorite fruit. Now look down. Under your feet is the place where all the green and growth begins. The soil. We take it for granted. We sometimes even belittle it as dirt, mud, muck, but this is where it all begins. Your soil is an entire ecosystem. It's a living world, a world that you can support and nurture. And when you do, you can literally reap the benefits. Healthy soil is the foundation for a happy garden, and compost is a fantastic way to nurture your soil. If you're new to all this, you might be wondering, what exactly is compost? Let's talk about what it is, why it matters, and then let's talk about how to create compost by going over the things you should and shouldn't add to your bin. Compost is the rich, dark mixture that you get when you take organic matter like leaves, grass clippings, and food scraps and encourage it to decay or rot. To make compost, we take notes from nature and set up ideal conditions for decomposition in our own yard. Air and moisture are important in the process, and most compost piles get hot in the center. The heat is created by tiny organisms, lots and lots of microorganisms. Here's a drawing of a few of them. We've got fungi and bacteria. Some thrive in the hot center of a new pile, while others live in the cooler parts of the pile. In 1 teaspoon of compost, there are 6 billion living organisms, hard at work breaking down the organic matter. Along with the microorganisms, there are so many other living things like earthworms and roly-polies in your compost and in your soil. We don't have time to talk about all of them in this quick start, but we know that the vast majority of them are beneficial in our gardens. Now let's talk about why compost is so awesome. Many of the benefits of compost are tied to the way it forms humus. No, that's hummus. Delicious, but we're looking for humus. Something a little more complex and a lot less appreciated. Have you ever walked through a forest after it rains? Breathe in the rich, earthy smell. It's one of my favorite smells. It comes from humus and soon to be humus, dead leaves and logs. Humus is a complex compound formed by decayed organic matter. It can come from the natural decomposition of plants and animals, manures, and mulches, or it can come from compost. Humus is a key ingredient of fertile soil, and compost is one of the best ways to add it to your soil. Compost improves soil structure. No matter what kind of soil you have, when you add compost, it gets better. It loosens up heavy clay soil and adds some oomph to sandy soil. Compost increases soil's ability to hold water. Humus acts like a sponge, and all that water holding means your soil and plants are resistant to drought. Compost enriches the soil. It adds low levels of plant nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, zinc. But perhaps even more importantly, compost makes existing soil nutrients more available to plants. It changes the soil chemistry in a way that allows plants' roots to take up nutrients more easily. As we've already mentioned, compost adds life to the soil. Many of the critters from your compost pile are beneficial in your yard and garden. And compost suppresses some diseases. Scientists are still learning about how this works. It's likely a combination of healthier plants and more beneficial microorganisms. You can think of all those compost microbes as a kind of probiotic for your garden. Compost adds good bacteria and fungi that discourage and even eat the bad pathogens. When you practice composting to get these benefits for your garden, you also get some great side effects that benefit society. Composting reduces waste. Organic waste makes up 2/3 of the solid waste stream here in the United States. That's an average of nearly 5 pounds of compostable garbage per person per day. Composting diverts much of this waste from the landfill or incinerator. Composting reduces pollution and erosion. If your organic matter was rotting in a landfill, it would produce methane, which is a greenhouse gas. So by composting your green waste instead, you're decreasing emissions. Compost also helps hold our soil together, so there's less sediment in our streams and dust in our air. Compost can even help clean up pollution. Cities use compost berms to hold and filter stormwater runoff. Compost can be added to polluted soil to bind up heavy metals, and some fungi and bacteria even eat oils and pesticides. Composting decreases our use of fossil fuels. By recycling your yard waste on site, you stop exporting your yard's fertility, and you need fewer and fewer resources in your garden. That means fewer delivery trucks carrying fertilizer and amendments to your store or home, and less dependence on synthetic fertilizers, which are made from fossil fuels. We like to think about closing the loop. Nature never has trash. One organism's trash is another organism's treasure. Waste becomes resource, death becomes life. It's a closed loop and nothing is wasted. Composting helps you close a loop. It's great for the planet and it's great for your own patch of soil. Now, I'd love to know, why do you want to compost? What benefits are most important to you? What kind of garden will you grow with your compost? Tell me in the comments below after this video. Now let's move from why to what. What can you compost? Anything that was once living will decompose. But there are some things that we should not compost at home, especially as beginners. I'm going to give you guidelines to make it easy for you to decide what goes in and what stays out. Be sure to download the free Ins and Out PDF at the link below. You can print it and put it on your fridge for easy reference. We'll start with the things that never decompose. Avoid adding inorganic items to your compost. Things like glass, metal, medicines, plastics, which includes styrofoam, other synthetic materials like nylon or polyester, and chemicals like pesticides, herbicides, engine oil, cleaning supplies, or any other poisons that wouldn't be good for your compost critters or your garden. Now let's talk about what you can compost, and we'll start in the kitchen. You can add peels, pits, and spoiled fruits and vegetables. Coffee grounds, filters, and tea bags can go in. Be sure to remove the staples from your tea bags first. Pizza boxes and other dirty cardboard that can't go into the recycle bin can be torn up and added to compost. You can add shells from eggs and nuts. And paper products like napkins, paper towels, and uncoated plates and cups can go in. You'll want to avoid adding wax or plastic-covered papers like milk cartons and some disposable plates. These things won't break down in your compost. Now, there's a whole group of things you can compost, but I'm going to recommend that you avoid while you're just starting out. If you aren't careful, these are things that can attract pests or make your pile smelly or introduce pathogens that could make humans sick. Sometimes people list these items on the no list, but as you get more experience with composting, you may feel comfortable adding these, so I'm going to list them as maybes. Breads and pastas, dairy products like milk and cheese, fats and oils, and meats, including fish. An alternate way to dispose of these items is to bury them a foot or two underground, where they can decompose without the risks I mentioned earlier. You will want to avoid adding most packaging that's labeled as compostable. These are usually plant-based plastics. They will compost in a larger scale municipal operation, but they probably won't break down in your home compost pile. I tried adding a compostable cup and fork to one of my hot piles, and even after a year, neither one had broken down much at all. Okay, time to pick a container and start collecting kitchen scraps. There are quite a few options. Here are a few commercial compost pails. There's also a stainless steel version of the white crock you can see in the bottom picture. And on the right of the top picture, you can see a plastic container that we've repurposed as a food waste collection bin at our house. You can even reuse a bread bag or a coffee tin as a free-cycled temporary solution. You'll need to think about how often you'll empty your pail. The food waste will start to rot within a day or so. So you'll want a bin with ventilation and a filter if you only want to empty it once a week. That will keep out fruit flies and keep down smells. If you make emptying your pail a daily routine, this matters less. You'll want to pick a container that is easy to fill and easy to empty. If it's easier to drop things in the trash can, it's going to be hard to change your habits. Look for a container that's easy to wash. I usually rinse mine out after each empty, and then I wash it once a week or when it gets stinky. You want a bin that's the right size. Will it hold the amount of waste that you're going to produce? And will it fit in the place where you're going to keep it? On the countertop or under the sink? Some people even keep theirs inside the fridge or freezer. And last but not least, you should pick a pail that you enjoy. You are more likely to use a container that you like, whether it's a stylish cup or a chic repurposed yogurt container. Next, let's talk about what you can compost from around the house. On a side note, I love that this whole house could be composted. You can add things like dust from your dustpan or vacuum bag, human hair and pet fur. These take a little longer to decompose, so you may want to spread them out rather than putting them in a clump. You can add dead houseplants and flowers. Potting soil can go into the compost pile too. If you have old cotton or wool rags that can no longer be reused or donated, you can add them to the pile. And most paper and cardboard can be composted. Tissues, printer paper, junk mail, toilet paper rolls. If you have a recycling program where you live, it's probably more sustainable to recycle paper, but composting is also okay. And paper is a good dry material if you don't have leaves or other carbon-rich options available. Now, paper can take a while to decompose, and I definitely recommend shredding or tearing it up before putting it in the pile. And take out any of those little plastic windows from envelopes. Some of the items you might be able to include are dryer lint. You'll need to be the judge of what is in your laundry first. Lint from mostly synthetic fabrics should probably be avoided. And dryer lint can contain chemicals from your detergent and dryer sheets and even flame retardants. Newspapers can usually be added to your compost pile. Inks used to be petroleum-based, but nowadays most are printed with soy-based inks, which are safe for your compost pile. I'd suggest that you check with your local paper to see what they use. And wood ash can be added to your compost pile in small quantities. Ash is alkaline, and if you live in a place with alkaline soil, you'll probably want to avoid adding ash to your compost or your soil. You should definitely avoid adding coal ash from your charcoal grill to the compost, and you should avoid adding glossy colored papers. Those glossy pages from newspapers and magazines have inks and coatings that sometimes contain heavy metals and petroleum byproducts. Unless you can find out how the paper is produced, it's probably best to recycle these instead. When you're collecting around the house, you might just want to add items to your kitchen compost pail. You could also try splitting an existing wastebasket. As you can see, I'm trying at our house. There's a paper bag for compostables and a plastic bag for garbage. Or you could add a second waste bin just for compostables. Things you find around the house are usually dry and not smelly, so you can empty these containers less often. Now let's head outside and talk about what you can compost from your yard. If you happen to have a pond, algae and pond plants can go into your compost. Garden waste, like dead plants and trimmings, can go in. Grass clippings are good for the compost pile. And fall leaves are great for composting. We even go so far as collecting leaf bags from the side of the road when people put them out for trash collection. Leaves are not trash. You can add soil to your compost pile. We usually add a few buckets to ours. This helps seed the pile with microorganisms and can add some minerals. Soil can also help hold water and heat in the pile. Straw can be added, but be sure you are getting straw, not hay. Hay would add a lot of grass seeds to your pile. And you can add non-treated wood. This can be sawdust, shavings, or even wood chips. Wood chips do take a while to break down, so they might be better used as mulch depending on what materials you have available. You never want to add wood that has been painted or treated, pressure-treated wood, to your compost pile. Use caution when adding weeds to your pile. Most weeds can go right in, but avoid any that have gone to seed. Your compost pile might not be hot enough to kill the seeds. You also want to avoid adding weeds that spread by their roots, like Bermuda grass, bindweed, or mint. One option is to solarize these types of weeds by sealing them in a black plastic bag in the sun. Once fried, they'll be safe to add to your compost pile. Evergreen needles and leaves like holly can be composted, but will take a long time to break down. I'd recommend adding them in moderation and shredding them with the lawnmower first. Manure from chickens, rabbits, horses, cows, and other plant-eating animals can be a great addition to compost, but you'll want to be sure you know the source. Sometimes pastures are treated with a persistent herbicide that isn't broken down by digestion or composting. So if you add these grasses or manure from animals that ate hay made in these fields, your finished product is going to have herbicides in it, not good for your garden. If you want to compost horse or cow manure, learn more about these persistent herbicides and talk to your farmer. You'll also want to avoid using manure right after an animal has been treated for worms. Now, there are a few things you want to avoid altogether. Manure from meat-eating animals like dogs, cats, and pigs should not be added to your compost pile because of the risk of pathogens. It's safer to bury those instead. You'll also want to avoid adding plants that have been infested by insects or have a disease. Some insect eggs and disease pathogens can withstand the heat of a compost pile. These plants could be burned or buried instead. Poisonous plants like poison ivy shouldn't be composted, but don't burn them either. You could use the black plastic solarizing technique to make sure the vines are dead and then bury them. For collecting outside, you'll want to decide if you're building your compost bins as you go or if you're stockpiling materials to make a big batch. We'll compare these two methods in the next video. If you're building a gradual pile, you can add the materials as you collect them. To make a big batch, or to hold extra materials, you could make a simple pile like we do, as shown in the top picture. You could also use cardboard boxes or plastic bags as temporary holding, or add a wire bin or some extra trash cans if you like to keep everything nice and neat, as shown in the lower picture. Now, you may have heard of browns and greens before, and if so, you might be wondering how these factor into your collecting. Compost happens more quickly when you get an ideal mix of nitrogen-rich green materials, like kitchen waste or grass clippings, and carbon-rich brown materials, like dry leaves or hay. We'll talk more about this ratio next time, but overall, this is something you don't need to lose sleep over. Decomposition is going to happen, even if you don't have the ratio perfect. So let's get started. Ready, set, collect. So now you know some of the amazing benefits of compost and some of the things you should and shouldn't put into your compost. In our next video, we're going to put it all together. We're going to talk about how to pick the perfect spot for your compost bin. I'm going to build a bin, and then we're going to fill it up. Before you go, we'd love for you to comment below. We want to hear, why do you want to compost? What kind of garden are you going to create? If you liked this video, please share it with your friends. We'd love to have them join us as well. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.